Okay, we are on 19A. Good morning, Mark.
Good morning, Rabbi.
Morning. Okay, good to see you. Okay, so we're on Yud Testament Aleph, 19A in the Art Scroll. It's 19A2. 19A2, the top column. The last thing we said is the Gemara wanted to bring a Braita to prove that Hanacha, the placing of the Bikurim, is key. And how did the Gemara prove that? The Gemara proved that by the fact that Rabbi Yossi, when Rabbi Yossi was talking about the Gemara, the Rabbi Yossi said that you might think a person today, nowadays, can a person bring Masa Sheni today when we don't have the Beit HaMikdash? Can a person bring Masa Sheni, the type that he needs to separate, because the land is still holy, even though the Beit HaMikdash was destroyed, you still have the holiness of the land. And because the land is still holy, it's required to separate the tithe. In order for you to eat the food, you have to separate the tithe. But nevertheless, the tithe, the maaseh. But nevertheless, you can't eat the maaseh sheni in Yerushalayim because of a special law that states in our days you can't eat the maaseh sheni in Yerushalayim. So what do? You take the produce, you redeem it onto a coin, and then once you redeem it onto the coin, then you can eat that produce. And that's what they do today in Israel. They separate the Maaseh Sheni, they redeem it onto a coin, and then and the law is today you don't have to redeem it. The law is also you don't have to redeem it for the full value of the food. And then once they redeem it on the coin, then you can go ahead and eat the food. Now he proved it. How did he prove it? And he proved it from at the end of the day he had a hekesh, because the Torah compared Bechor, the firstborn, to Maaseh Sheni. And the same way a Bechor, a firstborn, you only could bring a firstborn only when you have a Beit HaMikdash. Can you go ahead and bring the firstborn animal to the Beit HaMikdash? So too, the law of Maaseh Sheni is also only in a situation when you have the Beit HaMikdash. If you don't have the Beit HaMikdash, then you cannot eat the Maaseh Sheni in Yerushalayim. That's what the Gemara says. Good morning, Mr. Safdie. Now, in the discussion of the Gemara said that. And now the Gemara, that was the conclusion of the Gemara. But the Gemara had earlier attempted to come up with the law based on a mamatzinu, based on something that we found by the other item. We have a precedent by something, and we want to use that precedent to apply it over here. What was the precedent? The precedent was that we found Bechor. We found Bechor, the firstborn. What's the law by a firstborn? A firstborn has to be brought to Yerushalayim, brought to the Beit HaMikdash, and Maaseh Sheni also has to be brought to the Beit HaMikdash. Right? Both have to be done in Yerushalayim. Both have to be brought to the Beit HaMikdash. Now, the same way the firstborn, they have similarities. The Gemara wanted to use something called ma'amatzinu. We find the law by something else which is similar, and therefore we want to apply it over here. What is the common denominator between Maaseh Sheni and firstborn? The firstborn has to be eaten, that animal has to be eaten, the Kohen has to eat it in Yerushalayim. And Maaseh Sheni has to be eaten in Yerushalayim. So the Gemara said, the same way that the Maaseh Sheni, that the firstborn is only in the time when the Beit HaMikdash exists, is when we have this law of firstborn. So too, The law of Ma'aseh Sheni is only when the Beit HaMikdash exists. That's what the Gemara initially wanted to compare the two. And then the Gemara shoots back and says, you can't really compare the two. Maybe the reason why the firstborn has to be eaten in Yerushalayim, and nowadays you can't go ahead and process and eat the firstborn in Yerushalayim, because the firstborn requires sprinkling the blood on the mizbeach, on the altar, and certain parts have to be burnt on the mizbeach. And we don't have a Beis HaMikdash, we don't have an altar, so we can't do that. Therefore, maybe that's why in today's day and age, maybe that's why the firstborn is different. Maybe that's why the law is by the firstborn, you can't process, you can't do it today. But Ma'aseh Sheni, that doesn't require sprinkling of any blood, doesn't require any consuming on the altar. So maybe Ma'aseh Sheni you should be able to bring to the Beit HaMikdash. I'm sorry, you'd be able to eat, be able to go ahead and today's day and age, maybe you should be able to eat it in Yerushalayim. That's what the Gemara had suggested. So what did the Gemara do to that suggestion? The Gemara says, listen, I found something else. I found Bikurim. Good morning, Charles. I found Bikurim. Listen, I found something else. The first fruits. The first fruits, there's nothing consumed on the altar from the first fruits. They're all given to the Kohen. And what's the law by the first fruits? It's also supposed to be eaten in Yerushalayim. And we say the first fruits are only in the time when the Beit HaMikdash exists, is when you go ahead and you have the law of the first fruits that you eat it in Yerushalayim. The 7 species of the land of Israel. So, okay, very good. So therefore the Gemara said that you can't, I'll show you, it's not about the sprinkling of the blood. That's the reason why it doesn't apply today. The fact that we don't have the Beit HaMikdash, that's why we don't have the Bikurim today. And it's the first fruits, and we don't eat them, the Kohanim don't eat them in Yerushalayim today. So too, the Gemara wants to say, Ma'aseh Sheni, we don't have the Beit HaMikdash. We should also not process, not be able to eat the Ma'aseh Sheni, those that tithe. So what did the Gemara say to that? The Gemara said that what Mr. Safdie said. You know what? The first fruits, maybe the reason why. Good morning, Mark. Maybe the reason why the first fruits the Kohen don't eat them today is because there's a special law by the first fruits that it requires placing the fruits in front of the altar, in front of the mizbeach. Today we have no altar. The Beit HaMikdash is destroyed. So maybe that's why the law by the first fruits is that it doesn't apply today. But Ma'aseh Sheni is when you separate the grain, you separate your olives, your grapes, your wheat. You don't need a Beit HaMikdash. You don't need an altar for anything. It has nothing to do with an altar. So maybe today's day and age, maybe you should be able to eat Ma'aseh Sheni in Yerushalayim. That was the Gemara's, and therefore the Gemara had to come on to some other source to teach us that we're not able to eat the Ma'aseh Sheni today in Yerushalayim. That was the back and forth of the Gemara. It's a little complicated. Charles, are you with me? Is it clear a little bit? It's a little complicated, the back and forth of the Gemara. Welcome, Mark, in person again. So we have, so that's the steps of the Gemara. So now, when the Gemara was doing its back and forth, the Gemara said that we could have asked the fact that Bikurim is unique because it requires the placing in front of the altar. Why didn't the Gemara say that Bikurim is unique? Is because not only the placing is in front of the altar, the reading of the verses are in front of the altar, right? There's also, we know there's a mitzvah to read the verses. When you bring the first fruits, you have to say certain psukim. Aramid over Avi, you have to give the appreciation, talk about our history. But why did the Gemara say that Bikurim is unique? Because Bikurim requires the recital of the verses in front of the altar. And Maaseh Sheni doesn't have any recital of verses. So it would seem the Gemara says the fact the Gemara didn't say that, it would seem that the recital of verses are not so key, are not, it's not going to hold you back from fulfilling the mitzvah of the first fruits. We had the discussion in the Gemara, what's the most important thing in order for the Kohen to eat the first fruit? Is it the placing the first fruit in front of the altar, which is like giving it to Hashem in front of the altar, or is it the reading of the psukim? The fact that the Gemara said that the unique quality of the first fruits is the placing in front of the altar, which seemed to indicate the omission of not mentioning the fact that the fruits that you have to recite the verses, the Gemara wanted to infer, it shows you that the verses are not as key as the placing of the fruits in front of the altar. And therefore, the Gemara wanted to infer that the Kohen could technically eat the fruits even without the Yisrael reciting the verses that accompany the bringing of the fruits. That's what the Gemara wanted to say. So to that, the Gemara says, comes another rabbi and says, that's not a good inference. You know why? Because even if it's true, if you're correct, you want to say that the verses are not a key necessity in order for the Kohen to eat the first fruit. You know, you're telling me, it's not as so important, so to speak. It's not going to hold you back. What? It's the placement in front of the altar. But you do admit there's still a mitzvah to recite the verses. You might want to say that it's not going to hold back the Kohen, but you agree there is a mitzvah in the books, except it's not to the level that's going to hold back. Good morning, Simon, the eating of the fruits. But since there is such a mitzvah, so he should have said that the reason why Bikurim doesn't apply today, that the Kohen does not eat the first fruits in Yerushalayim today, he should have said both because there's a mitzvah to place the first fruits in front of the altar, which we don't have an altar today to do, and also there's a mitzvah to recite the verses in front of the altar. It's still a player. It might not be the most valuable player because it's not the same level of putting in front of the altar, but it's still something that's on the books that needs to be done, that's supposed to be done. So he should have mentioned it. And if you're telling me that if it's true, your inference, if it's true, you want to say, but the fact that he omitted it is a proof that it's not the most valuable player. But even if it's not the most valuable player, he still should have mentioned it. You say it's not the most valuable player because that's why he didn't mention it. But it's not a good enough reason. By not being the most valuable player doesn't mean it shouldn't have been mentioned. It should have been mentioned because it's still a player. He's still in the major leagues. He's not an all-star, but he's still a player. So therefore he says that can't be the fact that he didn't mention it. There's some other reason why he didn't mention it, and it's no proof that the reading of the verses is not a most valuable player. That's what the rabbi wants to say, and therefore how is he going to explain? Look what he's going to say. That's what we're up to in the Gemara on 19a on the right side. Amar, we'll read it. That was Amar Rav Ashi in the middle of the page, 19a2 in the art scroll. Amar Rav Ashi. Nihiti kuma leka. Maybe you're saying it's not going to hold back the Kohen from eating the fruits, the recital of the verses. But mitzvah mileka, is it not a mitzvah? It's still a mitzvah. You got it, 1982 in the right column, middle of the page. Amar Rav Ashi. It's still a mitzvah. V'lema mitzvah v'lifroch. The rabbi should have said that there is this mitzvah, this unique mitzvah, besides the placing in front of the altar. There's the mitzvah reciting of the verses. So why didn't he say that? The rabbi could have said that, even if it's not the most valuable player, it's still something of significance that could play a role. And therefore, therefore there has to be some other reason why the rabbi omitted it. Not because it's not the most valuable. Omitted the fact that Bikurim has this law of reciting of the verses, of saying the verses, right? And you know what? He's admitted the fact that you have to say that there's a mitzvah to say the verses, and not because it's not crucial. Maybe really the Gemara. That's what he's going to say. Look what the Gemara is going to say. The Gemara says, Ella Rav Ashi. Rav Ashi says, so why didn't the rabbi mention the point of the reciting of the verses? Kivan the Ike Bikuri Hager. Because since this Bikuri Hager, the convert, when the convert goes ahead and he brings the first fruits, right? Part of the recital, part of the text of the recital of the verses that you need to say when you bring the first fruits, when you come to the land of Israel, you bring the Bikurim, is you need to say, Hashem Nishba Hashem Lavotenu. We've come to the land of Israel that God has swore to our forefathers to give to us. And the ger, the convert, can't say, I've come to the land of our forefathers that he swore to us, because the land of Israel is not the land of the forefathers of the convert, because the convert's forefathers, he could have come from Moab. He could have come from whatever nation he could have come from. So he's not necessarily coming he's not coming to the land of his forefathers. His forefathers is a total different nation, not a Jewish nation. And so therefore, Luke Sikale. Therefore, the rabbi did not want to say, you know what? There's something unique about Bikurim. Maybe the reason why we don't apply Bikurim, the first fruits, and nowadays the Kohen doesn't eat it nowadays. You couldn't say because there's a mitzvah to recite, because there's the idea of psukim, because of the recital of psukim. It's because not always do you recite psukim. There are some times that you don't say psukim at all. There are some times that the guy would bring the first fruits, and you don't have to say anything. The ger, the convert, according to this opinion, is that the convert will not say the verse, will not say any verses. So because the convert, yes,
according
John.
to that opinion, the convert then doesn't say any tefillot, because they all talk about Hashem being our forefathers and all this, right? Only except
very good. So according to this, you would according to that logic, when they would say the Shemona Esrei, the Amidah, they would not say Hashem Elokeinu v'Elokei Avotenu.
Right.
You're correct. They would omit those words. However, the halacha is not like this opinion. The halacha is that the bikurim, even the first fruits, the ger, the convert would say, he's able to say that it came to the land of our forefathers. Now, how could he say that if it's not the land of his forefathers? His forefathers was some other morning nation, because Abraham, Hashem says to Abraham that Abraham is going to be Av Hamon Goyim. Abraham is going to be the leader of all the nations. So therefore, and I presume the reason is because Abraham brings to the world the idea there's a God in this world. So therefore, Abraham is really an ancestor for all the nations of the world. And therefore, he's a forefather. He is a real forefather, not only for the Jewish community, but also a forefather to the world. And therefore, that's why the convert says Elokeinu would be able to say in the Amidah, Charles was asking, he could say the same text that we say. There's no change for a convert in the first bracha of the Amidah, because Avram is called the forefather of the nations of the world. And also, that's why the halacha says by Bikurim, by the first fruits, that the convert would recite the verses that talk about, I've come to the land of our forefathers. So that happens to be from a halachic perspective. But the Gemara here, see in the commentary on the bottom, it says that the Rambam, the Rambam says that the convert does say Elokeinu v'Elokei Avotenu, and they say also in the Amidah he will say it, the convert, and also in the Birkat HaMazon. When we say in the Birkat HaMazon, Charles says we say it a lot of times. There's another case. Good morning, Michael. We welcome Michael Silverman. The other case is when we say in that, what do we say in the Birkat HaMazon? She'enchalta lavotenu eretz chemda tov rachava. We also mentioned the idea of it was given to our forefathers in the Birkat HaMazon. but the convert is also able to say that. That's how the Ritva, the Rambam, sure. Well, right. But this opinion, but again, it's a matter of dispute. This opinion is going with the opinion that the convert cannot say. He has to be a more biological forefather. It's not enough that he's a forefather from the spiritual sense that made you the forefather of Moni Yehuda, of the rest of the world. So therefore, just working with this opinion of the Gemara, which is not the halachic opinion, is the Gemara is saying that's why we did not mention the fact that Bikurim requires the recital of psukim. And in fact, it could be that the recital of the psukim is also a most valuable player. Maybe it also would hold you back from the Kohen eating. There's no proof. That's what the Gemara, that's what Rav Ashi wants to say. There's no proof from over here that the recital of psukim is not a key element. Maybe it is a key element in order for the Kohen to eat the fruits. Now the Gemara says, "V'leheda dina v'teisi b'mahatzad." The Gemara says, why do you have to come on to this hekesh? The Gemara says at the end of the day, we have a special pasuk. We have a verse in the Torah that connects two different laws, the laws of Maaseh Sheni to the laws of the firstborn. And by the juxtaposition, if that's the right word, the connection of those two subject matters is the Torah groups them together to teach us that just like the law of the firstborn is only in our days, it only applies in our days. The firstborn animal that you bring to the Kohen, that there's the mitzvah of Bechar. Today, there's no mitzvah we don't have a Beit HaMikdash. There's no processing of a firstborn animal. So too, the Torah is comparing Maaseh Sheni also would not apply today. What do we want to apply in what aspect? You would have to separate the Maaseh Sheni, but you will not eat it. The person does not allow to eat it in Yerushalayim. You can't eat in Yerushalayim. So what will you do with the Maaseh Sheni? You would separate the Maaseh Sheni, and then you would go ahead and you would redeem it onto a coin. And once you redeem it on the coin, then you can eat the produce. But the Maaseh Sheni itself, you will not eat in Jerusalem. That is what according to this Gemara, according to what this Gemara is saying. So now comes the Gemara and says, you know what? If I could figure it out without a pasuk, good morning, Jaime.
Good morning, Rabbi.
We're on 19a in the Art Scroll, A2, and now we just turned to A3. Now we're 19A3 on the top of the page. So the Gemara is saying, why do I have to come on to a pasuk? Why do I have to come on to the pasuk to teach me that Maaseh Sheni cannot, today's day and age, that tithe that you separate, that you're supposed to bring to Yerushalayim, that you can't eat it today in Yerushalayim, Maaseh Sheni. And part of the reason would be because the Maaseh Sheni has the law, has to be Lifnei Hashem. You're eating it in front of Hashem, which would seem to indicate it has to be in a place of that holiness where and if the Beit HaMikdash is not around, it's not considered, it's missing in that some of that in front of Hashem, because like the Hashem is in a certain sense it's hidden because the Beit HaMikdash is destroyed. So the question is, when the Gemara, why do we have to come on to the pasuk? The Gemara says. The Gemara says, we have a mahatzad. What's the mahatzad? Mahatzad is when you want to learn something A from B, and you tell me I can't learn A from B because there's something unique about B that A doesn't have. There's a certain quality that B has, and maybe that's why B has that law, but A doesn't have that quality. So what do? Usually I'll say, okay, but you know what? You're telling me that I can't learn A from B because B is stronger in a certain sense. But then I'll show you C. C does not have that strength of B, and yet it has the same law as B. So you can't tell me there's a unique quality in B that makes B stronger and more. That's why the law is, because I'll show you C. And then if you're going to tell me C has something, maybe C has some other quality that A doesn't have, right? So, and therefore you're going to tell me you can't use C as a proof because C has its own quality. Then I could show you back something else that doesn't have that quality. If I could even show you back B, I will be able to show you B doesn't have that quality, and then I could say I could show you that it's not that quality that's creating the law. So then I could take C and B together and say if there's a common denominator on C and B together, and that A is part of that common denominator, so then we should all have the same law. That's the concept. When different items have a different quality, it's obvious it's not that quality that's creating the law. So, but there's some other common denominator that's creating the law. That's that concept. So the Gemara is going to say, why don't we use that over here as well? If you look at the Rashi, there's a Rashi v'neiti b'ma'atzat. If you look at the Rashi, it's in the Rashi, it's about in the wide lines. It's about 6 lines in the wide lines. V'nehadad dina b'neiti b'ma'atzat. So Rashi explains. Everyone have it? It's about 6 lines into all the way up. It's about 6 lines into the small lines of the Rashi. Why do we need the comparison? Why do we need the special pasuk of the Torah to compare the two? Nema b'chor yochiach. The Gemara, you should say b'chor yochiach. Now, what does it mean b'chor yochiach? You don't have it. The Rashi is right over here. V'nehada dina v'neiti b'mahata. See it right over here. V'nehada dina. You got it, Mark, or not? Yehuda, you got it?
Yeah.
V'nehada dina, Mark, you got it? V'nehada dina v'neiti b'mahata. Okay, so Rashi says, Lama lihekesha. What the Gemara is really saying, why do I need the hekesh? The hekesh is the juxtaposition of the 2 psukim to teach me the law. I should be able to learn it without the hekesh. Nema, the Gemara says, tell me that the Gemara could shoot back, Bechor will prove it, Bechor Zahadin. Now, what does it mean, Bechor will prove it? Bechor will prove it is, the Gemara said, let's learn Maaseh Sheni. Originally, the Gemara said, let's learn Maaseh Sheni from Bechor, from the firstborn. And just like the firstborn, the law of processing the firstborn is only when you have the Beit HaMikdash. So too, Maaseh Sheni, meaning they both have a common thing. Both have to be eaten in Yerushalayim. The firstborn, the Kohen has to eat in Yerushalayim, and Maaseh Sheni has to eat in Yerushalayim. So the Gemara said, let's learn that. The same way Bechor, the firstborn, only applies in the time there's a Beit HaMikdash. So too, Maaseh Sheni is only when the Beit HaMikdash. So what was the Gemara's question on that? The Gemara says, no, I can't learn it. It's not similar enough. Why not? Because Bechor you have to bring things on the Mizbeach by the Bechor. Things have to be consumed on the Mizbeach. You have to bring parts of the animal on the Mizbeach. You have to sprinkle the blood on the Mizbeach. Maybe that's why you can't eat it nowadays. But Maaseh Sheni, maybe you could eat it nowadays. So the Gemara, what was the Gemara's response to that? The Gemara response to that was Bikurim. I'll show you Bikurim. Bikurim do not require altar. You don't put anything on the altar. And yet you do not eat it it doesn't apply today. So too, Maaseh Sheni should not apply today. So the Gemara says, no, Bikurim has something unique. There's a unique stringency about Bikurim. What's the unique stringency about Bikurim? Because you need to go ahead and place the first fruits in front of the Mizbeach. So maybe that's why it doesn't apply today. But Maaseh Sheni, we don't have to put it in front of the altar. Maybe Maaseh Sheni should apply today, right? That's how the Gemara and that's how the Gemara ended that point. So to that, the Gemara is saying, why did the Gemara shoot back? You're telling me, I show you Bukhar. Bukhar, the Gemara can say Bukhar, there's no law of placing the firstborn in front of the Mizbeach. There's a law of placing the firstborn. Yes, you process the carbon on the Mizbeach, but there's no law, there's no special law like you have by the Bikurim of that you have to place something in front of the altar. So since there's no, so you can't tell me that the reason for the stringency of the only reason why it applies in our days is because you're placing in front of the altar. Because I'll show you something that's not placed in front of the altar. Okay, so that's what you're saying, because you're actually placing on the altar itself. Okay, that's the Gemara is gonna. We'll see what the Gemara is gonna say. What Mark is saying. So that's where the Rashi is gonna. Look where Rashi comes in. Name a Bechor Yochiach. Say Bechor will show you. There's no placing in front of the altar of the first. You don't place the firstborn in front. Bechor Hadin, and then you say, so what is the common denominator? The common denominator is they all require the coming to Yerushalayim. Everything has to be born in Yerushalayim. The firstborn has to be born in Yerushalayim. Maaseh Sheni has to be born in Yerushalayim. Bikurim has to be born in Yerushalayim. And all of them, in the same way, firstborn doesn't apply nowadays. Bikurim doesn't apply nowadays. So too, Maaseh Sheni should not apply nowadays. That's what the Gemara wants to. The Gemara is asking. So to that, the Gemara responds what Mark says. It's true, you might not have to put the firstborn in front of the altar, but you have to put some parts on the altar. So you have to put the blood of the firstborn on the altar. So therefore, the firstborn and Bikurim both have something called a connection to the altar. But Maaseh Sheni has no connection to the altar. So that's why the Gemara says, I can't learn Maaseh Sheni from firstborn. I can't learn Maaseh Sheni from the first fruits, because those have a certain type of stringency, a common denominator stringency that Maaseh Sheni doesn't have. What's the common denominator by those two that Maaseh Sheni has? Something connection to the altar. So that's why the Gemara has to come on to the Hekesh. That's why I would not be able to learn it out by comparing the items, the cases to each other, because they're not comparable. I can't go ahead and say, you know what, I have a precedent on the books that firstborn is only when there's a Beit HaMikdash. Bikurim, the first fruits are only when there's a Beit HaMikdash. You cannot process a firstborn today. You don't eat the first fruits today, and when there was no Beit HaMikdash. So too, I'm going to want to compare Maaseh Sheni, because they all have the idea of Yerushalayim, and if you can't eat those things today, I can't eat my Sheni. It's not comparable, because those things have a connection to an altar, and maybe that's why it doesn't apply today. This is not connected to an altar. So therefore, how do I know I can't eat Maaseh Sheni today outside Yerushalayim? I mean, even in Yerushalayim, I can't bring Maaseh Sheni and eat it today, and when the Beit HaMikdash is destroyed, because of the Hekesh. That's why I need a special, we call it a Gzerat HaKatuf. The Torah needs to teach us this lesson by a special juxtaposition of the two psukim to teach us this law that today we don't eat Maaseh Sheni in Yerushalayim. I would have to I must redeem it and put onto the coin, but I can't eat it in my Sheni. The two psukim are, the Torah says, Bechor connects firstborn to Maaseh Sheni, and it connects the two things. What's the language of the pasuk? V'achalta sham lefnei Hashem Elokecha. The pasuk connect firstborn to Maaseh Sheni. Exactly. We could, right. We thought we could do without. The Gemara, if we could figure it out without the pasuk, we don't need a pasuk. That's why the Gemara is showing us we might have thought we could figure it out without the pasuk. The Gemara shows you could not figure it out with the pasuk, and therefore we need the pasuk. That's what the Gemara says. Look in the Gemara inside. The Gemara says Malas ala shavashim shekim behem yesh sad mizbeach. Good morning, Mr. Asmi. There is, Richie, there's a sad mizbeach. There's this point of the mizbeach that something is brought on the mizbeach, which is unique to both. First, the first fruits, it's not on, at least it's connected to the mizbeach, has to be placed in front of the mizbeach, and also the bechor is on the mizbeach. So now the Gemara, now we're going to get into a new point coming up right now, which we're gonna go much more into tomorrow. The Gemara wants to know, Mike Sava, this rabbi, this Tana, he held that he had a question regarding Ma'aseh Sheni. This was the question, Richie. In our days, can Ma'aseh Sheni, meaning your grain grew, you have to separate a tithe, Ma'aseh Sheni, the first and second and fourth and fifth year of the cycle, you have to bring 10% to Yerushalayim. You're supposed to eat in Yerushalayim. Does that apply today? That was the question. And am I able to eat the Ma'aseh Sheni today and bring it to Yerushalayim, or I can't eat in Yerushalayim Ma'aseh Sheni today because something's missing today? Because the Beis HaMikdash is destroyed. Maybe I can't eat the Ma'aseh Sheni in Yerushalayim. That was the question. And he wanted to learn it from Bechor. He says, you know what? We know the firstborn I can't do today. The firstborn I can't do today. The firstborn animal that I have to give to the Kohen, that's not brought today. There's no Beit HaMikdash. It's not brought. So too, he attempted to compare it to firstborn. So the Gemara wants to know, what does he hold about Kedusha Rishonah? When Yeshua went to Eretz Yisrael and he conquered the land. So Rashi explains, he definitely holds that the land of Israel remains holy forever. Once the land remains holy, and there would be an obligation of separating. He holds separating Trumot and Masrot. The land is still holy, and because the land is holy, you need to separate the Trumot and the Masrot. Even though the Beit HaMikdash is destroyed, is it still holy? That's the question. The land of Israel, we conquered the land of Israel, right? And now the question is the holiness of the land that you require to separate the Truma and Maifet, but that only apply when we have the land? Or does it still apply once we were sent, when there's no Beit HaMikdash, when the Beit HaMikdash is destroyed? Is there still this biblical obligation of separating Truma and Maaseh today? So this rabbi holds that the holiness of the land remains, and you still have to separate the Truma and the Maaseh. The question is, what status does the Beit HaMikdash have today? The place of the Beit HaMikdash that was destroyed, does that still have that same holiness that it had before destruction? And meaning, or not? Meaning, technically, would you be able to bring a korban today in that spot if the Beit HaMikdash is not around? There's no mizbeach. Would you be able to build it? Would you be able to build a mizbeach today? There's no Beit HaMikdash. Would you be able to go ahead and bring a korban? Stay tuned tomorrow to be continued. Have a great day, everybody.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you. It's a very complicated Gemara we're doing, everybody. Hang in there, everybody. Thank you.
Have a great day, Rabbi. Have a great
You
day.
too. Good thing, Mr. You too. All the best, everybody. Take care. Thank you.